Hello and welcome everybody to my session on roll-up web parts. My name's Brett Lonsdale. I'm going to be doing the session on we're utilising the out-of-the-box roll-up web parts in SharePoint 2010. That's going to include things like the content query web part and relevant documents, and also some other ones that may not be so obvious, things like the data viewer web parts. We're going to have a look at all of those. They're all no-code solutions. I'm a developer, but obviously this is the information worker track, so I'm gonna, if I start talking code, then you're free to throw things at me or something. And if you do want to talk code, then just come up and give me a shout at the end of the session. Okay. Having said that, a real developer doesn't class XSL as code, and I might just touch on that a little bit. So you're not allowed to throw anything if I mention XSL. Okay. So first of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Brett Lonsdale. I work for a company called Lightning Tools. We develop tools and web parts for SharePoint, mainly SharePoint 2007, and we've also got some 2010 tools available. You can see my email address on there, brett@lightningtools.com. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to email me. I didn't put my Twitter name on there, but it's just @Brett Lonsdale, and you'll also find @Lightning Tools as well out there. A couple of bits and pieces that I've done. I'm the author for the Developer's Guide to the Business Data Catalog. That's something that I specialize in, and also contributed to a couple of other books, including the WSS Developer's Guide and also the Admin Companion 2007 and 2010. Anybody listen to the SharePoint Pod Show as well? A couple of you? Okay, so yeah, you'll find myself, Nick Swan, and Rob Foster. We tend to interview a number of people, SharePoint MVPs and Microsoft employees and so on SharePoint, and you can download a sort of bi-weekly episode of that as well from the SharePointPodshow.com. Okay, so what's the agenda today? Well, just going to take a quick look at why you'd perhaps want to roll up content in SharePoint. What's the benefit of rolling up content in SharePoint? We'll just get that point across fairly quickly. And then we're going to have a look at where we might be able to actually aggregate data from. So it's some of the web parts that are available to us can aggregate from within the site collection. We'll have a look at what tool you should use if you wanted to go from another site collection or maybe from another web application or something. And also maybe even outside of the SharePoint environment, you can also roll up data from there as well. So we'll have a look at what tools are available to you. We're going to concentrate mainly on the content query web part that you get with Office SharePoint Server. I'm going to show you how to use that directly out of the box, and should you want to customize it, I'm going to talk briefly about how you can customize it and the sort of things that you can do as well, using a little bit of XSL. Okay. And then we'll take a look at the data viewer web part in SharePoint Designer. That's going to allow us to aggregate from lists, and using web services, we may also be able to use out-of-the-box web services, not a web service we have to write or anything. We can use an out-of-the-box web service to go and get some list items from another list that might appear somewhere else. We're also going to talk about some of the other things that appear in that content roll-up section when you go to insert web part, including things like the Rss Viewer Web part, and there's a relevant documents web part and so on. I'll show you a few of those, and we'll talk about some of the others that are fairly simple to use. And we'll also have a quick discussion on, if none of those sort of meet your needs, what other options do you have available to you? There's a possibility you may be able to get your developers to create custom solutions. And then we're just going to really summarize as to which one you should use depending on the job. So why roll up content in SharePoint? Well, how many people rely heavily on email in their inbox still? Yeah, most people. I think there's always other ways that you may receive information, but we still rely on email somehow. I mean, we get alerts and things like that in SharePoint that come into our inbox to tell us that something's been created or something's changed or whatever. So the inbox is still one place that we go to because information comes to us, and that's really the difference here. SharePoint does cut down a great deal on how much how many emails we might be receiving, so we're not having to send documents around all the time. People know where to look for them. But one thing that's not really human nature is to actually go and have a look for people assigning tasks to us. And if you imagine how big a site collection might be with team sites and document workspaces and meeting workspaces and so on, people are creating tasks, assigning them to you, and you may not even know that they're there because you didn't take the time to actually go and visit that workspace and open up the task list. So that's what we're kind of looking at here, is how to actually roll up that information from wherever it might be within a site collection, put it in one place, so whenever somebody lands on the homepage of the intranet or whatever, they might see some tasks assigned to them and realize that they have to do something about it. So that's one of the reasons. Content tends to get hidden quite a bit, so you just may overlook the fact that something was created that you should really be looking at, and it's especially useful for things like announcements. So again, you know, if your sales team are, maybe you're nothing to do with sales, but your sales team has a big announcement and they've been trained now not to email everybody in the company with that announcement, they're actually putting it in their announcements list. Again, unless you actually go and visit their sales team site, you're not going to see that announcement. So there's another good reason. We could actually use audience-targeted content for that reason. So I mean, who cares about what lunch is served in New York today at your office there? Probably nobody. You're more interested in what lunch is being served here in London at your office here. So if there was an announcement from the catering team to say that they had a steak and kidney pie or something like that, you're not going to care less. But when you create that announcement, you could actually target a specific audience, and that might be anybody that is attending or working at the London office. So therefore, you see that announcement, you're actually starting to see relevant content. So again, that's something that we can do with some of these web parts here. So here's just an example of what a site collection might look like. So we've got a top-level site. It might be your portal, and then we've got a number of subsites and perhaps a number of workspaces as well. And you can see each one of these has a task list, and perhaps anywhere in there is a task assigned to us. So the whole idea here is just to simply go and aggregate that content from wherever it might be in the site collection and display it within the one location. Now, we can be selective. I'm going to show you how we can actually filter this information. We can specify which sites we want to roll up from. So it might be that only subsite 5 and the workspaces are actually relevant to us. We don't really care about any of the other stuff. So we can actually select which content or which site we want to start the roll up from, rather than getting everything from the entire site collection. The sort of content that we can bring into SharePoint, depending on what it is we're trying to get, we can get XML. We could use data from any data source that's exposing its data via XML, or we've also got things like RSS feeds. You'll actually find that any SharePoint list or library has an RSS view, so we can actually subscribe to that using something like the RSS reader web part and bring the information in. We can also go after external data sources as well using the RSS. And that's one nice way where we can actually go across site collections as well. So if we actually wanted to go and get a list from another site collection and bring it into our site collection, we can rely on the RSS view for that. We've also got web services, so using, again, the data viewer web part, we can connect to a web service and bring the data in. We can get data from databases and lists inside or outside the current site collection using things like, if we're inside the current site collection, we can use a content query web part. If we're outside, then one of the other tools would be useful. But there's all the places that we can go to get information. So I mentioned the tools that we're going to explore. The first one's going to be the content query web part. We'll then open up SharePoint Designer and take a look at that, explore relevant documents, and also the Rss Viewer Web part. So the content query web part. The content query web part was there in SharePoint 2003, and it's got better and better. It was available in 2007, and there was some frustrations with it in 2007 that meant that you couldn't display multiple columns was one of the issues. So you could only really display the title field from every single list that you were rolling up from, and the title field didn't always tell you a great deal about what that content was. You had to click on it to find out. Now we can actually specify other columns, which is a nice thing. As long as the style the style that you choose allows you to actually view multiple columns, you can then go and specify the columns by just simply typing in the column name. So I'll show you how to achieve that. No longer do you actually have to go through the painful exercise of actually exporting the web part and modifying a web part file and then re-importing it again and modifying some XSL styles to display multiple columns. That's one thing that we had to do before. So it's a lot easier to display multiple columns now. There's also views for things like multimedia files. So if you had WMVs or something like that stored within a document library, the content query web part will actually show those WMVs as thumbnails. So you can simply click onto it and it will play inside the web part, which is quite nice. You don't have to create a custom solution for that, which I guess was the only other option. So SharePoint 2010 makes a good use of content types, and so did SharePoint 2007, where they were introduced. So if you're using multiple content types inside your lists and your libraries, that's one of the sort of ways of filtering. So you can roll up perhaps all documents, but only documents that use a particular content type, which makes things a lot easier. And you can go after those columns as well. If you wanted to choose a site column from a content type, you can display that too. There's a number of out-of-the-box styles that you can choose from. You'll find these actually reside in a style gallery that's at the top level site within your site collection. So there's a few that are presentable. You can simply use those, or you've got the ability to create a custom XSL style as well, which I'll show you an example of. Okay, so let's take a look at the content query web part and the sort of thing that it can do for us. So here's a simple example here. If I just expand my content query, you can see there I've got a number of tasks being rolled up. It doesn't have to be tasks. It can be literally any list or library. And one benefit here is I've got the actual title, which is the hyperlink to the item, and then we've also picked up another column as well without having to do any work, which is actually the person who authored that item, or the person it was assigned to. Sorry. So you can see just simply by clicking on that, that's going to take us to the display form of that item. Okay, so fairly straightforward web part. And they're coming from two different sites. We've got a sales site and a marketing site that they're coming from. Now, if I go to edit the web part, we'll talk through some of the different options. So the appearance, layout, and advanced section of the web part you'll see in pretty much any web part that you add onto the page. What we're looking at specifically for the content query is the query section and the presentation section. They're unique to this web part. And when I expand the query section, you can see the kind of options that you have available. So the first thing you choose is the source. Where are you actually going to roll your content up from? So we can simply go and show items from all sites within the entire site collection. So it's going to include all of the content there, wherever it may be. We can also show items from the following site and all of its subsites. So that's a simple click here, and we can browse out. And you can see the entire site collection there in a tree view. And I can now start to expand that, select a site, OK it. And you can see we're just getting information from the marketing site now. The nice thing about that is as that part of the site collection grows, as more subsites are added to the marketing site, that content's going to automatically be included in our content query as well. Okay, so we can choose from a specific site and its subsites. We can also go after a particular list as well. So rather than just simply choosing a site, you can see here the tree view is now including lists as well. So you may have more than one task list within a site, so now I can be very specific and say, no, I just want to display this specific task and so on. So yeah, again, this time we're just going to see sales information. Okay. So that's one way of choosing the source. Moving on from that, you can then actually go and specify the list type. So if we simply flick back to perhaps the top option. So here's all the available list types. So we've got announcements and calendar lists and contact lists. Even if you've created a custom list, then that is still available. So I recommend if you are going to go and create custom lists, then you may actually want to use a content type in conjunction with it. So rather than actually going and creating your new columns inside the custom list, go and create a content type first, and then use that in conjunction with your custom list. Otherwise, it's difficult to filter out. If you just choose custom list, you're going to get every single custom list that's available within the site collection. Okay, so that's, again, one way of filtering the content. So once you've chosen the list type, you go and choose the content type category. So there's, you find most of the lists appear under the list content types. There's no real need to add that unless you specifically are using multiple content types within inside your lists. Obviously, if we choose a task list, then you're not going to get any benefit from saying that you just want to use the task content type unless there's another content type being used in there. And then there's an option at the bottom there to include child content types. So it might be that you've created something that derives from the task content type, so that will automatically be included as well. You can choose whether you want to include tasks in your own content types or just that one. This is where the audience filtering comes from. So one thing you can do in SharePoint Central Administration is create an audience, and that audience is made up from profile information. So it might be the office you're based at, it might be the person that you report to, or the Active Directory group that you belong to, something like that. And there's multiple types of audiences that you can create. Now, when you go into something like an announcements list, I'm going to choose tasks because I can't see announcements straight away. If I jump into the list settings here, under my advanced settings, he says, I've lost where the option is. Somewhere's the enable audience targeting. In general, so, oh yeah, thank you, audience targeting settings. Okay, so in here we can actually enable the audience targeting settings, and that gives us an additional column when we go and create items now. So if I go back into the tasks list and add a new item, we've got the typical fields, and then right down at the very bottom is the target audiences. So when we're creating announcements, we just say, who do we want to target this content to? Now, in the actual list itself, everybody's going to see that content unless the permissions are stopping them from seeing it. It's only when it's rolled up into a content query web part that it only shows you the stuff that you happen to be a member of. So that's a great way of just seeing relevant information. Okay, and then besides that, there's the final way of filtering the information is to actually pick and choose columns and then an operator and then a value. So it might be that you just want to, you don't want to see every single task, you just want to show tasks that you've not completed yet, or if you want to be put in a better mood, then show the tasks that you have completed. That typically makes you feel a lot better during the day. Okay, so you can add up to 3 levels of filters, which is useful. So then we get to the presentation section. Inside the presentation section, you can specify how you want to display it. So you can simply use the existing style, but add group levels. So you've got up to 2 levels of grouping that you can do by any column. You can specify how many columns you want to display. You can choose how you want to sort it, and so on and so forth. And more importantly, you can set an item limit, which I really recommend, because obviously if you go in and say, I want to roll up every single announcement from the entire site collection, you're going to see a big web part on your page. So you can just bring back the sort of top 10 announcements or something like that. Okay. Now this is one part that's relatively new. So here you've got the fields that you want to display. And you can see that we've got, in this example, we've got a link, we've got a title, and we've got a description. 3 different sections that we can specify a column for. So an example here, I may get this wrong, but if I do, then it's a good thing because I can actually show you how I'd go and find out the right column name. I'm going to type in task status there. So instead of showing who it was assigned to, I want to see the actual task status. And it was wrong. So that's a good thing. So how do we actually find out that information? Well, what you'll find is there's these are all the site column names. Okay, so just here's a shortcut. If you click onto the actual help icon there, rather than going through to your site settings and so on from the site actions menu, you can actually open up the site column gallery from here. And it opens it up in a new window, which is helpful. And there's all the base columns. We've got the core contact and calendar columns and so on. And as I scroll down, we should see the task columns in their own group. So the core task and issue columns are here. So you can see here it was actually task space status, which I think is what I typed in. But if that column name exists more than once in more than one content type group, you actually have to specify the content type group. Okay. So this is where it comes in handy to actually have the window open, because now I can flip back in and perhaps copy and paste that value, because you need to enter it exactly. And that would go in square brackets like so. Okay, and fingers crossed this time it will work. Or maybe not, as the case may be. Now, that might be... Let me just try status. I did practice this, but I forgot. Yeah, it looks like it was status. Okay, there we go. But everything I showed you was relevant still. So here's the status of each task as well. And so on. So. Thanks. Yeah, just coming to that. So it's a very good question. So the question was, can you have multiple columns? So as well as having a title column and a description column, what you might want to see is the title, who it is assigned to, and the status. Okay. Now, with that particular XSL file, that's not possible to have all 3 showing at the same time. What we would need to do in that case is actually create our own XSL style, and you need to create basically the grid to actually take more than one column in the description section. But what it does do, our users might not actually fill out every single column that we were displaying. So it'd be difficult to show you in that example, but I'll explain it. It will accept me doing this. So I can actually list 2 columns in there. Okay. Now what it's going to do, if the status field was left blank, if it didn't contain a value, it would then go and show you the assigned to instead. Okay, so you can still show some relevant information if that makes sense. So you could list all of the columns there. And if you think of a document library where you've got metadata columns and some might not be filled in, that would be certainly useful. Another improvement as well is this RSS feed. So every SharePoint list has an RSS feed view, as I mentioned. But what this is particularly useful is you don't want to go and subscribe to every single announcements list inside your site collection. But if you're already rolling that up inside the content query web part, you could then go and assign to the, subscribe to the content query web part's aggregation of the announcements list. So then you are just seeing all of the announcements, which is, again, useful to do. So that's the query in the presentation sections. What we also have, like I say, at the top level, is the style library. And inside the style library, you can see there's some XSL style sheets. And in here there's some styles. You can see there's like item style and level style and content query main, things like that, which are all out-of-the-box styles. And when we go to configure the web part, we can actually choose some of those styles. And this is how we choose them. So there's the group that it might appear in, and then we've got the actual style. Okay. Now, multiple styles are actually stored within one file. So here's an example where you would use this one with the document library, where it's got the title, the description, and the document icon, which is obviously so you can see if it's going to be an Excel document or a Word document, and so on. Not really applicable to my task list. We've also got things like bulleted titles and large titles and things like that. So you can have a play around with these and see which one you prefer. There's the large title and so on, which doesn't particularly work too well with that example. Okay, but it is possible to customize those. Now, to customize them, this is the downside. You end up creating something that looks like this, coming up in just a moment. It looks worse than it is because what you're basically going to do is export the existing style sheet out of the style gallery and then go and modify it to meet your requirements. You're not going to write a whole load of XSL by hand from start to finish. You're just going to say, yeah, I just perhaps want to, rather than have that large title, as big as it is, I want it slightly smaller. So you're going to copy and paste that, and maybe you want it in a different color or something. But you can do all sorts of things in here. You can perhaps do some conditional formatting. So rather than displaying everything in the same color, what about showing things like tasks that are completed in green and tasks that aren't completed in red, and so on and so forth, rather than filtering them out. So you can literally do what you want with some XSL. And here's a bit of an example of doing that. So just here, what I've done is worked with the percent complete column. So if you can see we're using different colors. This is actually showing green, yellow, or red, depending on whether this is complete or not, and we're showing some things in bold or not in bold, depending on, again, whether it's complete. Now, sometimes it can get a little bit messy because one thing we would have to do in order to get that to work is create a property like this one. Inside the web part file. So we are actually going back to sort of doing some modifications and so on. All I'm really doing with this line here is saying that I want to show the percent complete column, because otherwise the percent complete column is not available for me to do that conditional formatting on, which is a little bit of a pain. So what I have to do is simply copy that, go into my web part and export it. So I export the file, and I could call this task list. And open that up with Notepad, and you can see all the other properties in there. So it gets very, like I say, very messy. You need to have a fairly good understanding of this, but there's loads of help on here, and Heather Solomon is a good example. If you go to heathersolomon.com, she writes a lot of these styles for you. So the property that I'm changing is this one here that says common view fields. I'm just simply going to go and paste in my example, it says I want the percent complete column available. And then you basically have to go in and import that web part. So when I go to insert web part, I'm just going to go and edit the page here. And I can upload a web part. And then add it to the page. So I get exactly the same web part back again with the change. And the one thing that I did forget is I need to upload my, my style sheet. So there's plenty of styles to choose from. This is simply if you want to make something completely different. So there's my item style, and I'm going to go and replace this item style. And hopefully what we'll see is some color formatted tasks. I'm not quite sure what happened to my web part. Try that again. Anybody see what's happening to that? Oh, there we go. I didn't agree. Okay, so I just set the style that I wish to use. And you can see I've now got my color formatting coming through with the style. So the only one that's currently in progress is the yellow one at the very bottom. Perhaps I should choose a different color next time. All right. Okay, so that's really the content query web part. Quite a useful web part if you want to aggregate information from, like I say, anywhere within the current site collection. We've then got the data view web part. The data view web part did have something called the linked data source, or does still have something called the linked data source. Does anybody use that in SharePoint 2007? Okay, so some people, yeah. I might have a little bit of disappointing news for you. Hopefully Microsoft are going to realize something soon and correct it. Basically, the linked data source is not that useful anymore, and I'll explain why. But the data view web part we can connect to, like I say, pretty much any data source. So we can go to database connections, SOAP services, REST services, and XML files, and so on. And let's just dive in and have a look at it. So I can edit the site within SharePoint Designer. I can do that from the Site Actions menu now, which is neat. Okay, and when I go to data sources, you'll see my data sources along the top here. Now, if I go to a SOAP service connection, there's a number of web services that exist out of the box with SharePoint. So I can basically specify a site name, followed by this virtual directory called _VTI bin, and then the name of a web service. So I'm going to point it to lists.asmx and say I want to connect. And you'll see in there that I've got a number of different methods that I can use. And there's one called getListItems. So I can choose getListItems, and then I need to go through and specify all this information. So what is the list name that I'm after? What view name do I want? I can put in a query in there if I want to, and so on. And then it's going to be using a web service to bring back the information. So the only thing with this is it's very difficult to get all the information gathered in order to connect to those lists in the first place. And of course, it's not as useful as the content query web part, because you're literally going to have to configure it each time. And if somebody goes and adds a new list somewhere, then somebody's got to come into SharePoint Designer and configure this again. It doesn't grow like it would do with the content query. You can also use a data view web part to do a little bit more with some of these lists, like conditional formatting and bits and pieces like that once you're inside SharePoint Designer. Now, one thing you used to be able to do is use this as a kind of like a roll-up. So what I could do is go and configure my linked data source, and you can see in here that this is showing me my current site, and I've got the SharePoint lists and the SharePoint libraries that live within this site, and I can add them across. So I can take tasks, add it across there, and it's expecting me to go and add another one before I can click finish, because it's a linked data source. It's going to take more than one data source and join the two together. Now, what you used to be able to do in SharePoint 2007, or SharePoint Designer 2007, is on this page you would be able to go and add another site. So I could say, well, I don't just want the current site, I want the site from this URL as well. And then it would give you all the lists from that site. So I could say, I want the tasks list from the site that I'm in, and the task list from site B, and the task list from site C, and I want to join all those together and display them all inside one web part. Only the button has gone. So we've kind of notified Microsoft about this, and hopefully that button will reappear somewhere where we can go and add other sites. I'd imagine it's got to reappear at some point, otherwise this saying current site is a little bit strange. You'd expect us to be able to go and add some additional sites there and use that as a roll-up. I think that's a limitation with Designer, yeah. The conversation we had with Microsoft was we can't find this option, and they're like, well, the option is there somewhere, but I can't find it either. So, but we did kind of trawl it.
You still use Designer 2007 or 2010?
I believe you cannot. You use the you need to use SharePoint Designer 2010 with SharePoint 2010 and so on. But I mean, that might be an option to you by the time we get RTM, which obviously should be this week or nearabouts. Okay, so keep an eye out on that. That might be a useful way of aggregating content for you as well. Another web part we have is the relevant documents. You can aggregate documents using the content query web part. The useful thing about this is there's a couple of queries that you can do in the tool pane that you can't do with the content query. So you can see that in this example, I am just aggregating documents. The nice thing about it is it gives me a little bit more information than the content query, so I can see when it was last modified, the location of it. I've got a link to the properties, and I've got the document icon and so on in there as well. Now this is just showing 3 documents, and those documents are documents that I've created. So you can pick and choose what type of documents you want to see from this data section. So the data section shows me documents that were last modified by me. So me being the current user. I can also include documents that were created by me or documents that are currently checked out by me. That's quite a useful one to educate your users with so that they don't leave documents checked out all the time. And you can also display a link to the containing folder as I showed you. And again, you might have thousands upon thousands of documents, so you can limit the number of documents that are actually returned also. So, not with that, no. I'm not sure whether you'd be able to do that or not. I think you're just going to be limited to the modified date. So if you modified it and that was it. Yeah. Hi. Yeah, good question. So, so can you display things? Well, I mean that's how the web part comes, but you do have, at least I think you do. Actually, no, you don't with this one. I thought you had an XSL editor, but you don't with this particular example. Some of the web parts come with an XSL editor where you can actually go in and undo it that way again using XSL, but yeah, unfortunately not with this. So yeah, you use this one as is. Okay. So that's the relevant documents. Like I said, you can get the content query web part to do a similar thing, just with filters and everything, but that's almost like a pre-configured content query web part for you, which is very useful. We then have the Rss Viewer Web part. This is a useful web part if you do want to go outside of the current site collection. So here's a couple of examples of it being used. Looks like I've dropped my internet connection. That one's relying on an internet connection. Just bear with me. See if we can pick that up again. Whilst I'm waiting for that to connect, I'll show you the properties. So all we do with this, we go into the tool pane, and under the RSS properties at the bottom there, we put in an RSS feed URL. So that can actually go outside of the SharePoint environment. That particular example is going to the Contoso website and getting an RSS feed from that. You could go to BBC News or something and go and get the RSS feed and bring that into the Rss Viewer Web part. And again, you can configure it, refresh intervals and so on. It's an Ajaxian web part as well, which is nice. So you don't have to refresh the page. You can get this refreshing every few seconds if you like, if it's live data coming in. And that does have the XSL editor. So with that, you can go in and change the way that your RSS feed is displayed. Again, you can color format it or do whatever you want.
Are there any requirements on the file authentication?
Yeah, you can meet some challenges with authentication. And I know that sometimes, obviously, that's going to be an issue with, especially with SharePoint lists. So if you are going and aggregating across from another site collection or something. So I know in 2007 it definitely needed to be Kerberos. I'm not sure in the 2010 environment. So yeah, I'll see if I can find that out if you drop me an email. And there is another example of that one at the bottom here. Now this is actually aggregating content from a document library. So similar sort of thing. We just point it to the RSS feed. I'll show you where you can get that. So if I go to a document library here, and up to the library ribbon, and there's the RSS feed. So you'll find that for every single list in the library. It can be turned on or turned off, but I just simply need to go and grab the URL from the top there and that becomes my my feed. Right. I heard the refresh images on. Sorry. I guess you could with the XSL editor. You'd need to modify the XSL, but yeah, in theory you could do that. Yeah. So yeah, you're going to point it to one feed at a time. So what I'm really getting at there is, you know, if you just want to bring in a list or a library from another site or site collection, then this is a great way of doing it. So you can still roll up the content, if you like, from you know, a site that's deep in the site collection all the way to the top. It's useful.
If you have a number of Rss Feed Web parts, do you use content query web parts to aggregate those?
No. No, the content query would simply just point at lists and libraries. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. But yeah, the reason I'm really for showing you that one is just a case of going and getting content. So I guess rolling up content as opposed to aggregating content. Now, as far as other options are concerned, the SharePoint object model is there. You can pretty much do what the content query web part does, but there's a couple of hidden secrets that Microsoft have put in as far as the way that they actually go and get the content. It is that they've got a very clever caching mechanism. So quite often if you try and create your own custom web part and roll up the content with that, using the SharePoint object model, you tend to find that performance is a real issue, and there's a big lag on that page. So if it means customizing a lot of XSL to get it to be the way you want it, normally the content query web part is the best performing option, rather than trying to develop your own tool. There's about 3 or 4 vendors as well that have a third-party cross-site collection web part. I know Quest do, and Bamboo, and just to show I'm being fair, we also have one, but I'm mentioning the other 2 first. But you can use those and simply go across site collections. If you, the thing about that is it's normally best practice to have multiple site collections, obviously instead of one big one, because of the content database and so on getting too large. The fact you can have multiple content databases, so it might be that sometimes you have to go across site collections to aggregate the content that you need to display, rather than just being tied to the current site collection. So it's worth having a look at some of those also. At that point, I'll open up to some more questions if you have some. Yeah. No, very good questions. I think the reason why you're asking that is, so if you've got permissions set on list items in sites, obviously, and inside your lists, then the content query web part is aware of those permission settings. So you're actually only going to see content that you do have permission to. So yeah, something, if it's a list item or if it's an entire list or whatever, they do check the permissions and they won't be displayed if you shouldn't be able to see them. Yeah, absolutely.
The content rating, can you use content query web part without most popular documents by rating?
Yeah, there is a content rating web part.
If you have content rating on document libraries across portals, say for instance, in some different sites, could you on your homepage have a content query web part pull back all the most popular documents from those various sources?
Again, the information is going to be available in the columns, so yeah, with a bit of XSL, you could pretty much do the same thing. Yeah, you can to a certain degree use the XSL to do some filtering as well. So if the filter options aren't available to you, then you can filter it out using XSL. Although that does seem to have a bit of a performance hit as well. So again, that is a trade-off. Yeah.
If you've customized item style and content query name in 2007, can you update that? Can you just bring them straight into 2010?
Yeah, they upgrade quite nicely. Yeah, so yeah, if anything that you had in your style library before will come across when you upgrade it. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
When you're configuring the content query web part, you get to choose the list type. What if you have a content type that's in 2 different list types? Let's say tasks with a project task. Can you actually choose it from 2 different list types?
It's a good question. So if you have more than, one content type that appears in 2 different list types, how do you get around that? Well, it's not going to work, unfortunately, because the first thing you have to choose is the list type, and then the content type. Right, yeah, and unfortunately there's not a way around that. But, yeah. Okay.
Can I get data into Exchange Outlook with SharePoint? Something I've always wanted to do. I can get it from SharePoint into Outlook, but vice versa.
So you want to get information from,
From emails and stuff that go into Exchange and view through Outlook.
and bring it into SharePoint.
His profile, why can't you see all that data? It's sitting in Exchange. Can it be SharePoint?
So there is, there's the inbox web part and things like that that you could use. Todd Bleeker did something very clever with the content editor web part. So using the content editor web part, you can point to one of the Outlook DLLs with a query parameter on it and bring back content from any view within a mail file. There's also the option to use the page viewer web part if you use Outlook Web Access. And you can just use the page viewer web part to point to any view again.
I think the new calendar overlay function now you can bring back information from Exchange there.
Okay, very good. Excellent. All right, well, if there's no other questions, thank you very much for attending. Enjoy the rest of the